Mazel tov. Simcha by us in the Koblenzer Kehillah, our online Kehillah, here on YouTube, where last night, really this morning technically, I guess, according to legally, my wife and I, we had a baby, mazel tov, a baby girl. It's a big simcha, and we wünscht all the best for the mama and the baby. And it's interesting. Today is the 6th of Tishrei. It's also this year is Yud Gimel Midas, because the usual day of Yud Gimel Midas is Shabbos. So today is the Yud Gimel Midas. We read all the korbanos, and at least that's the minhag in our kehillas, like I know in Satmar and a lot of other places they have this minhag. Anyway, this Vav Tishra is the yartzeit of Rabbi Podbelevitz, who was the Rav in Richmond. And I also was Rav in Richmond years ago. And when I lived there, I used to go daven by his kever. There was a picture on the front page of one of the secular magazines, a monthly magazine. It was called Style Magazine. And there was a picture, you can find it on Vosesnayas and also on the Style Magazine website, from the old times, back, when I was the Rav in Richmond. It was an article about us, and the front cover was me davening by Reb Cheskel's kever. And so it's interesting that he was someone who I made a devotion to, and I would go daven by his kever, and happened he had no children. I know his wife remarried after he passed away, because there's next to his kever is an empty plot, and that's where I guess she would have been buried. That's why I'm assuming she remarried. And but anyway, I feel a little bit like it's a kind for Rabbi Cheskel. It's in his chus, perhaps, that we have a baby on his yartzeit. So anyway, Cheskel ben Avram Meir at Gehaisen, Cheskel Podbelevitz, she was from before the war, and he has a nice matzeva there in the Sir Moses Montefiore Cemetery in Richmond. If you're ever there, if you go to the B'Sachayim in Richmond, Sir Moses, there's a Geniza for Sheamus, kind of in the middle of the B'Sachayim, and not too far from the Geniza, from the place where you put the old books, you will see a mitzvah, a tombstone. Is all in Lashon HaKodesh, all in Hebrew, and it's taller than a lot of the other ones. It looks pretty nice, actually. And that's Rabbi Cheskel Podbelevitz, the Richmond Rav, Seichet Tzaddik Levrachas, Chosik Aleinu. And I met one of the I spoke to one of the Grandis family who remembered him. I know there's pictures from the founding of the Jewish Federation. They had a different name at the time, and I believe he was on that committee. So there was, I don't know which one was him, but in the pictures you see a few Jews with beards. So I don't know, it's possible that he was one of those in the picture. This I don't know. I remember Mr. Grandis, he said, he took, it was a real old-fashioned Rav, not like today where you buy a chicken in the store and you see a hechsher and that's it. In those days, you'd bring the chicken to the sheikhet, and you'd have to, if you had a shiloh, you'd bring to the Rav. So Mr. Grandis, he told me he remembers as a small child bringing a chicken liver to Rabbi Cheskel, the Baal Hulula, and gefragt wegen der Leber of the chicken is kosher, and gekickt auf the Leber, and ik gesagt, wegwerfen the Leber, but the chicken is kosher. That he brought the chicken liver to show the rabbi, and he said the chicken is kosher, but throw away the liver. That's the story that I heard firsthand about Cheskel, and that's really one of the. I'm only telling it because the Indians tell stories on the yartzeit, and that's one of the few stories I have. It's not really a story that is so momentous or anything. It's just that this is the connection that I have. The other story that I found on the internet was the case law that Cheskel was the expert witness at a court case. And so the case law is brought, and he was brought as well as the rabbi from Petersburg, Virginia, were both brought as witnesses to testify in the court. The story goes, there's buried in the same Beis HaChaim Reverend Goldman, who was a sheikhet. I mean, that's the title that's listed there, Reverend, and he was a sheikhet. That's what, generally, if someone's not an ordained rabbi in the Jewish community, but they're a sheikhet or a moel or a chazan, they're a ritual slaughter, a ritual circumciser, or a cantor. The classic title that was used in English-speaking countries for a long time was Reverend. And the title Rabbi was maybe used unofficially sometimes, like Gershom Sheshis. The title that was usually used for him was Reverend, but he was sometimes referred to as Rabbi, and some other Ehrlich Yidden like Isaac Lieser, and certainly Yisrael Ber Kershid, who was a big Talmud Chacham, who was a Talmud Nosson Adler, who was also both Isaac Kershid and Rabbi Yisrael, both Isaac Lieser and Rabbi Yisrael Kershid were both Yisrael Ber Kershid were both also the Chazan in Richmond. They were at some point in their lives. They served as basically as the chief rabbis in Richmond, as the Jewish religious leaders in Richmond. I'd been to Rabbi Podbelevitz's kever in Queens a number of times, and I'd like to go there. That's a very interesting kever to go to because it's very old. But anyway, back to Cheskel's, the Baal Hillelula. It's the yartzeit today. So Rabbi Podbelevitz, quick story. So there was someone, Goldman, like I said, he was a shaykhit, and he was buried there at Sir Moses Cemetery, which is the Orthodox cemetery in Richmond. And when he was nifter, like we said, he was buried there when he passed away, he was buried there in the Sir Moses Cemetery. After he left this world, his wife, the widow, the almana, and the children, they sind geworden for Darben. They went off the derech, as the kids say these days, and they joined Temple Beth Haba, the Reformed Temple. And so when Mrs. Goldman left this world, her children buried her in the cemetery of Beth Haba, which is a very historical cemetery as well, particularly because they have there a section for Jewish Civil War veterans, or I believe it was soldiers who died in the Civil War, and since they were, a lot of Christians didn't want them to be buried in the, I don't think they were that religious that they didn't want to be buried, that they cared to be buried in Jewish cemetery, but they couldn't be buried in the regular military cemetery. And so Temple Beth Haba made a section there for the Civil War soldiers, for the Confederate soldiers who were Jewish. And there's only about, 20 or 25 graves in that section, maybe less, but maybe more, 30, 40. I'm trying to think. It's been a while since I've been there. I only remember visiting there once or twice, but they always like to brag, Temple Beth Haba, that they have the only Jewish military cemetery outside of the Holy Land. But it's not actually a cemetery. It's just a section of their cemetery. And they were not from Richmond, those who were buried there. They were from anywhere throughout the South, throughout the Confederacy, got buried there at Beth Haba in Richmond. An interesting history. Anyway, like I said, Mrs. Goldman, we're talking as I believe it was in the late 1920s, early 1930s, this case was, don't remember exactly, but she was buried then because Cheskel passed away in 1939, could have been 1935, I'm not sure. I know he came to Richmond sometime in the 20s, and so he was there for almost 20 years, maybe 19 years, I'm not sure, 18, 19 years. So when Rabbi Podbelevitz, so anyway, when Mrs. Goldman was buried there in the Reform Cemetery, I'm sorry, I'm very tired, obviously, with a big simcha last night. I had a busy, difficult day yesterday, Baruch Hashem. So anyway, the Goldmans, their children, wanted to exhume the body of their father and bury him in the Reform cemetery. So Rabbi Cheskel, the Baal Hilalula, he said he testified in the court. It went to Arkos, it went to the civil court, and he testified that the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch, states that a wife, her body may be it's a very serious thing to exhume a body. It's not something that's just done willy-nilly. It's only done in very rare occasions. One would be to be interned in the Holy Land. One would be if the cemetery is going to be destroyed, and so there's nowhere. The grave would be destroyed, and so you have to exhume the body for that reason, to rescue it. And a few others. There was a bunch of turkeys over there. Wow, it's a whole flock of turkeys. So one acceptable reason to exhume a body would be to move it to move a wife to be next to her husband. That is permissible, but not to move a husband to be next to his wife. So steht in Shulchan Aruch. And so he said this is a code of Jewish law, and this is based in the Talmud, which is based in the Bible itself. That's what he testified. And so that's where the authority comes from. It's an authority that has basis in biblical roots. And so too the rabbi from I don't remember his name. I believe it was also Goldman, if I'm not mistaken. I could be mistaken. It's been a while since I read the article, but you can find it online. The rabbi from Petersburg testified, upholding and corroborating Rabbi Podbelevitz's testimony, or it might have been the other way around. I'm not sure, but something like that. It could have been the rabbi from Petersburg said it, and Rabbi Cheskel corroborated. I don't remember, but it makes it a better story since I'm talking from the yartzeit this way. So anyway, so the next witness to come up was the Reform rabbi. Don't remember his name offhand right now. And the Reform so-called rabbi appealed to the judge, and he said, wait a second. He said, you have to understand, we Reform Jews have repudiated the Shulchan Aruch a long time ago, just like the Protestants repudiated Catholic traditions. And so therefore all of this is meaningless, and there's no reason for us to waste time on some old book that we don't accept as part of our tradition. It's old-fashioned. It's not for these days. Come on, Your Honor. What are you doing, listening to these cavemen? This is the 20th century. The judge therefore said to the Reform rabbi, okay, you solved the whole issue here. You're saying that the Reform, I thought Jews are Jews, I don't know. But you're telling me as a Reform rabbi that the Reformation of the Reform movement could be compared to the Protestant Reformation. I said, absolutely. So he said, so I would never exhume a Catholic husband and bury him with his Protestant wife. They're two different religions. So too Orthodox Judaism and Reform Judaism are two different religions. This is what the Christian judge said. He may have been a Protestant, I don't know. Or he might have been Catholic, I don't know. He might not have been Christian at all. This I really don't know. He could have been Jewish, I don't know. But anyway, he could have been Muslim, who knows? He could have been atheist. But anyway, I should probably look into that before I tell the story. But he said, I'm not going to exhume an Orthodox Jew and place him in a Reformed cemetery any more than I'm going to allow to exhume a Catholic to place him in a Protestant cemetery. So that's the story that I have of the Baal Hilula, Rabbi Podbelevitz. Again, he's not a major figure really in the story. I think the truth is the Reform rabbi was much more of a big figure in the story to his chagrin. But there's a certain quality in that, is that the demonstration of the solidity, I don't know if that's a word, the solid nature of orthodoxy, that Rabbi Podbelevitz didn't need to say anything, any kind of kiddush. I remember one of my friends, Chrief Demun Stratner Rebbe, because he's a Einikel from Stratner Rebbe, and even though he dresses more modern, but is a big neshama, a Rebbish neshama, and he's taka a Rebbe, even if he's clean shaven and so forth. But this tzaddik who I often would be shoyel eitzah by, I should talk to him. Not always shoyel eitzah. He would offer eitzahs, really. He would volunteer his eitzahs, but the seed, he told me that if I become a rabbi, I don't have to make big chidushim. The things that already exist in our tradition generally are good enough, and you don't need to come up with anything new. Yiddishkeit is good enough on its own, and the truth of that is brought out here by this story. truth is, I heard certain tzaddikim that was their derech. Like, you don't have chidushim, let's say, from one of the most popular tzaddikim that we have recently has seen a renaissance in interest in, was Shaila Karastir. All of a sudden became a very big devotion to the saint that was relatively obscure until recently. I remember, you would go into Makolet in Yerushalayim, and they would have a picture because it's segula to keep away mice. And I had a friend who was a Karastir Chassid. He was Ben Bias by Karastir Rebbe, Zechron Livracha, Karastir Berbish Rebbe, Zechron Livracha. And a Chassid of his, someone who learned in yeshiva with us. And I'm friends with what I would call a current Karastir Rebbe, who has a home upstate by us, and I talk to him once in a while. But what was the Cheskel Karastir? I know Jewish soundbites. Yehuda Geber, he pointed out that the Jewish history soundbites. He pointed out that Shaila, he was not known to make big chidushim. By the tish, he would just read straight out of the Noam Elimelech. And teach, which I've seen other Rebbes also. That's how they fear sich. And in a certain sense, there's a tremendous godless there, a tremendous greatness there, that just to fear sich al pi Shulchan Aruch, like the Satmar Rebbe from Monroe told me, just to follow what we've received. And you don't need anything new, you don't need anything fancy, you don't need anything different. Just follow what we have. This is what the Masorah, the traditions that we've received, is good enough. That's the and it's similar, lahavdil, to the story that I tell about. It was also a story. This wasn't a Reform rabbi. It was a professor of theology who happened to have been a Reform Jew, and he wrote a book, and he received some kind of award from the King of Belgium, I believe, or the King of the Netherlands. No, I guess Belgium was already a republic then. Must have been, or is Belgium even a republic? I don't even know. I know the Netherlands is a monarchy. I believe it was the King of the Netherlands who gave the award to this theologian, so-called theologian, Professor Alexander, Benjamin Alexander, I believe was his name, who happened to have been a Reformed Jew, and Bishop Fulton Sheen was then a young priest who was studying in Belgium, that I do know, in a very famous Catholic university there, and they sent him to Oxford to somewhat to debate this Professor Alexander because of his outlandish claims that that were the toast of the town because they were so unique. And he made certain claims, and Bishop Sheen, at the time, Dr. Sheen, I believe he already had his doctorate, he repudiated these very outlandish claims that don't even deserve to be repeated. And he said, by simply explaining them to their author in a way that the author said, that's the most eloquent expression of my thesis. And he showed how ridiculous the ideas were. And so Bishop Sheen, being Catholic, he said, why don't you, one of the church fathers, I don't remember, Augustine perhaps, and we'll sit down and we'll make a chavrusa if you're interested in theology, We'll learn together, I guess, Augustine or some other of the important early church fathers and their theology. And this Professor Alexander said, it's teugnish, because he wants to be famous. And you're not going to get famous by just towing the old party line. You have to come up with a chiddush. You have to come up with something novel if you want to be famous. So that was the claim of this Professor Alexander. But in the end, I don't know how many people really heard of Benjamin Alexander. Like Bishop Sheen, he also never had children. But was never married, never had children. But Bishop Sheen said, as a priest with no children, he has to have spiritual children. I don't think really that... certainly Bishop Sheen had a lot more spiritual children. Talmidim Melu Abanim. A lot more than this Professor Alexander that has a page on Wikipedia that's very brief, and it's not really very well known. So he was searching for fame, and it was fleeting because he was seeking it, like it says, "Borech achar hakavod borech mimenu." Someone who runs after honor will run away from him. So this Professor Alexander is not very famous. He probably made it into who's who, and he achieved some brief fame in his time, but it was fleeting and not lasting. And anyway, the fame was for something quite ridiculous, as opposed to Bishop Fulton Sheen, whose fame is very famous. When he was not Borech Achar HaKavod, he wasn't running after fame. He actually was quite ashamed of his success to a certain extent, and humbled by it. And in my esteem, even though I'm speaking of a person from a different faith, I believe he is worthy of the kavod that he received and the fame that he received. And he was always a good friend of all different religions. So it's you see the comparison here, and so it's the same story. Here with Rabbi Podbelevitz, lahavdil, that here he was a Yid who just told the party line, did what he was supposed to do. He followed Shulchan Aruch. He was a Talmid Chacham, and he was a faithful servant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and a faithful teacher of Torah to his Kehillah, and by that he was worthy to whatever kavod he received. He was worthy, as opposed to this Reform rabbi who thought he was a big shot and thought he was so smart to go and say, to tell a Gentile that, and to, in a certain way, express some anti-Catholic bigotry in his anti-Orthodox bigotry, put them both together, kind of what we're worried about right now with the seating of a new Supreme Court justice, and what we saw when Amy Coney Barrett was seated as a judge, the bigotry against her, and so too I think we'll see that people who are staying true to the old ways, true to the Constitution, true to our traditions, will be successful in ways that those who try to make new things and show off something with these new ways will not be successful. And the value of conservatism. I'm very tired. A lot to do. Thank you for listening. You made it this far, 38 minutes. A lot of it's because I'm rambling and tired and speaking slowly. Maybe you watch it. I think, is there a way to speed up YouTube to listen to it quickly? If you made it this far, I appreciate it. You're helping me out, and I hope that this channel will grow at this new year. Tafshin Pei Aleph, Me'ashbois Yorim Evyon. The Sfarim Kedoshim say that it's a time of lifting us up out of the dunghills. And Eivish will helfen, will shikken gold tzedek and will restore to the real old ways. Vashivenu Hashem Elechem Neshuva Chadish Yemenu Kekedem, that God should renew, as it says, as the prophet Jeremiah said in the book of Lamentations, O Lord, return us unto you, and we will return. Renew our days as of old. That's the real chiddush. That's the real novelty. Is the old, original ways. And when we say Mikedem, we say Began Eden Mikedem, like we say in the Sheva Brachas, that back to how it was in the Garden of Eden, in the ancient, original times, to restore us to that state of before the original sin of Adam Rishon Kodim Eched, and so too we all can be restored. We're coming Baldach to Yom Kippur. Lefanei Titaru, this day of purity, of when we're going to be restored to that same innocence, Gan Eden Mikedem. And so that I was able to have a new baby today, who's a pure, innocent little baby, pure from any sin. We should all be zeicha to experience that. That's what I remember they taught us in yeshiva, that after Yom Kippur you're like a brand new born baby, brand new. Excuse me, so that should all help, and we should be zeicha to Gmar Chasim Teva and a good bench to your. All right, cool.